big deal for someone who is a Christian to practice homosexuality? Let me ask you this. Is it a big deal for someone who is a Christian to lie, cheat, steal, commit adultery, fornication? Is it a big deal to sin against God? Well, of course, it's always a big sin against God to be rebellious to what he's saying in his word. And so sin is the biggest of all deals in terms of how we interact with God. Romans 1 is really fascinating to me because Paul makes a very interesting argument, starting off with those who are idolaters. And he says, basically, to his Jewish audience, he's saying, those Gentiles over there, they're idolaters. And the Jews are saying, preach, brother, preach. We understand that. They're worshiping the creature rather than the creator and so forth. And then he moves to homosexuals. And he says that they've left their natural desires and are lusting for one another, men for men, women for women, and so forth. And it's almost as if he's talking to them as if they were idolaters. And so you begin to wonder, wait a minute, Paul, you went from idolatry to homosexuality. Why would you do that? Well, I think it's because in idolatry, the creature is being worshipped rather than the creator, which is an inversion of the natural created order. And why then the homosexuals? Why would he bring that particular sin to the forefront? And I think it's because, sometimes we say of homosexuals, or used to say, you can't say it anymore, that they were perverts. But I don't think that's really exactly what Paul is thinking about here. I think he's more thinking in terms of there being inverts, that they were created for expressing themselves sexually with the opposite sex, and they were inverting the natural created order to have sexual relations with their own gender. And still, though, but why? Why the idolaters and why the homosexuals? Why does Paul start off with that? Well, I think it's because immediately he follows up with all the other sins that non-homosexuals and non-idolaters practice, all the way from envy and covetousness and lying and so forth, stealing, all the other sins. Well, what's that all about? I think the message from Paul is that all sin is an inversion of the created order. He created us for love and we hate. He created us for peace and we fight. He created us to be satisfied and we still covet and so forth. And so he's trying to teach us about how sin is not according to the created order and how best to do that than to see things that we would all agree with regard to idolatry. We can see the inversion in idolatry in that it's wrong. We used to be able to see that homosexual activity was the poster child for something that was sinful, something that was an inversion of the created order. Of course, we no longer can do that. And so Paul must be thinking that, if there's a culture that has come to accept homosexual marriage and homosexual relationships as normal, they don't understand the most fundamental argument that could be made about what is the most glaring inversion of the natural order, which is the sexual preference thing. And so, wow, if we can't even get that straight on homosexual behavior, how will we ever be able to get that straight on the sins that you and I commit? That we're not tempted by the homosexual thing, perhaps, but still, it's the same principle for heterosexuals. Just because you are naturally attracted to the opposite sex doesn't mean that gives you license to involve yourself in things that are not sanctioned morally with regard to heterosexual sex. What's really different today in our culture, in our time, is that whereas in the past, someone who involves themselves in fornication, for example, who is a Christian, more likely than not, they're going to say, what I am doing is wrong. It's not according to God's will. I shouldn't be doing it. I'm doing it, but I shouldn't be doing it. What's different about the homosexual situation today is that homosexuals are saying, what I'm doing is okay morally. It's not a sin. I was created that way. God gave me this instinct to be attracted to the same gender. Well, even if you could figure out that you were, for some reason, whatever, the switch was flipped, and instead of being heterosexually attracted, you were homosexually attracted, it doesn't give you license to say it is morally right, because the attraction is not the problem. The attraction is not sinful. It's not sinful to be attracted to one gender or another gender. What's sinful is giving yourselves over, whether it's heterosexual or homosexual. It's always a big deal to violate God's rules in that way, as it is with every other sin. Once we quit calling sin sin and say to people, whatever I'm doing is okay morally, that is always not just a big deal, it's a huge deal. In fact, it's an eternal deal, eternal implications.